Most games build anticipation through months of marketing cycles, slow drip reveals, and relentless promotion. Warriors Abyss did none of that. Instead, it materialized overnight, a stealth drop in the latest state of play that felt more like an experiment than a major release. And yet, its premise was immediately compelling. Dynasty Warriors meets Hades. Muso spectacle meets roguelike brutality. A genre defined by power and excess, suddenly forced to contend with consequence. And for years, Warriors games have been about effortless destruction, wading through armies, cutting through waves of enemies like paper. Abyss, it flips that fantasy on its head. It makes survival the goal, not domination. Every battle here, a calculation. Every death, a lesson. Every failure, a demand to play better. It's a game that dares to ask, what happens when a genre built around invincibility suddenly makes you vulnerable? If you enjoy the review today, do me a favour, subscribe, it helps out the channel a huge amount. Warriors games rarely lean on story for me. Traditionally, their narrative serve as little more than scaffolding, a framework that justifies the endless wave of enemies thrown at you. And yet, Warriors Abyss opens with an unexpected barrage of story-heavy dialogue. You are a warrior, summoned to hell to fight back against a demonic force that has overtaken the realm. Alongside a fallen king now, you must battle through the abyss, reclaiming this land one fight at a time. So far, so standard, but then the game just kind of veers off course. The opening hour is bloated with exposition, long cutscenes, relentless text dumps, pacing that simply clashes with its roguelike structure. Abyss wants to be story-driven, but never quite figures out how to deliver that story. Compare that to Hades, where narrative is seamlessly interwoven between runs. It rewards progress with evolving character interactions. And yeah, you definitely won't find any of that here, because once you push past the opening act, the story, well, it simply evaporates. It is essentially an odd imbalance, overwhelming at first, then abandoned. Abyss seems caught between two approaches, unwilling to fully embrace narrative depth, yet unable to let it go entirely. And had it committed to either extreme, it might have worked, but instead, the story here becomes just another layer of friction, one that fails to add really meaning to the experience. The combat in Warriors Abyss is familiar until, well, I guess it isn't. On the surface, it follows a tried and true Muso formula, light and heavy attacks strung into sweeping combos, carving through waves of enemies with ease. But buried beneath the spectacle is a roguelike framework that demands far more than mindless button mashing. Now, the summoning hero system here is really the backbone of the combat. Call in allied warriors mid-combo for a devastating strike, and they'll vanish just as quickly. They're locked then behind a cooldown. It's a really well done mechanic, reinforcing precise combo execution while adding an extra layer of tactical depth. That depth is further shaped by the game's formation system, which determines both passive buffs and combo activation points. You might need to land, let's say, 4 light attacks to call in one hero, then chain 2 heavy strikes to trigger another. If it sounds overwhelming, an auto formation option handles the setup, letting you focus purely on the execution. There's also then no shortage of warriors to recruit here, over 100 playable characters and support characters, each with unique abilities. And in theory, they feel distinct. Some favour speed, others brute force, a few specialise in ranged attacks. The game's unique strategies encourage experimentation, allowing for absurdly destructive attack chains that escalate combat into pure spectacle. It works, and in those moments, it works well. But Warriors Abyss also undercuts its own flow, the biggest offender, the dash mechanic. This evasive move grants essential invincibility frames, crucial in a game this chaotic, yet it's inexplicably locked behind a cooldown, when the best moments of combat encourage relentless aggression. Forcing players into artificial restraint feels at odds with the game's design. Now, the rest of the combat toolkit then does fare better, at least. Special attacks charge through a meter, leading to high damage bursts that punctuate the action without disrupting the flow. And then there's the team attack, a full screen spectacle where the world shifts to black and white and your character enters an unstoppable rampage. It's a raw power trip, excessive in the best way, and one of the few moments where Abyss fully embraces its own absurdity. Warriors Abyss then leans heavily into its roguelike framework, dividing its world into 4 layers of hell, each containing 8 levels, and they all culminate in their boss fights. The objectives begin as mindless tasks: defeat 30 enemies, something you'll accomplish in seconds. But the game escalates rapidly. By the late stages, you'll be tasked with cutting down 800 enemies in a single stage, transforming the power fantasy into something closer to endurance-based survival. At its core, Abyss is a game about risk and reward. Every level offers a choice: recruit new warriors, enhance your ability, or spend currency at scattered outposts throughout the Abyss. Healing stations are rare and unreliable, but they do appear. Treasure chests offer game-changing upgrades, but demand you complete high-risk objectives, and danger zones flood the battlefield with enemies, testing whether the promise of greater rewards is worth the gamble. Between runs then, progress ties into a skill tree, a currency that you do carry with you after death. It unlocks new formations and hero. It pushes the game's strategic scope. In theory, this should add longevity, offering new approaches to combat with each attempt. In practice, balance issues undercut the experience. I completed my first run in around 6 hours, not through skill, but because I stumbled upon an overpowered hero that just trivialized the later stages. The game's difficulty as well fluctuates wildly, turning some encounters into brutal wars of attrition, while others become laughably one-sided. On that note as well, boss fights are solid, until, I guess, they aren't. While most are well designed, the final stretch throws back-to-back bosses at you, an artificial difficulty spike that feels less like a climatic challenge and more like an attempt to squeeze a little more game time out of the experience. And then there's the enemy variety as well. I need to mention this. There's very little. At first, the sheer volume of foes flooding the battlefield is impressive, a classic warrior spectacle of bodies flying in every direction. But after a while, that illusion fades. Most enemies are filler, existing purely to be cut down en masse. The real threats are telegraphed through large purple attack markers, turning later encounters into a glorified game of dodge the indicator. It's a system that strips combat of improvisation, reducing encounters to predictable routines rather than evolving challenges. More enemy variety, both in behaviour and design, would have done wonders in keeping the experience fresh. For a game that isn't pushing graphical boundaries, Warriors Abyss struggles more than it should. Even on a PS5 Pro, performance buckles under pressure with frequent frame rate dips when the action reaches its peak. This issue, the frame rate drops, it creates erratic fluctuations that make combat feel less responsive than it should. It's not the kind of game where you expect flawless optimization, but given the relatively simple visuals, it's hard to ignore how rough it can feel in motion. And those visuals, honestly, functional at best. Character designs are serviceable but uninspired. Environments are bland and repetitive, and despite procedural generation, the game frequently recycles the same locations. The backgrounds are always icy wastelands, dimly lit castles, fiery ruins, that sort of thing. You've seen it all before, but here you just keep on seeing the same, structures, the same location layout over and over. The sense of scale as well feels really small, as if the game is cycling through a handful of prefabricated arenas rather than building a world worth exploring. The one saving grace has got to be the spectacle of combat. Special moves and team attacks pack enough visual punch to briefly mask the game's shortcomings, but they are, as a warning, temporary distractions, moments of flair in an otherwise visually forgettable experience. At $25 or your regional equivalent, Warriors Abyss seems reasonably priced. Well, until you notice the 3 DLC packs are waiting alongside it, each carrying a price tag nearly as high as the base game. Rather than broadening its world or refining its systems, Abyss instead fixates on customization, an ironic indulgence for a game that struggles to establish a strong visual identity in the first place. These aren't expansions, nor do they offer new challenges or mechanics, which you may praise. There's no gameplay locked away, that's a good thing, but it's just this avalanche of cosmetics bundled together with an urgency that suggests there's an eagerness here to monetize the game before it's even proven itself. DLC can be a welcome extension of a game's lifespan, a way to deepen the experience, rather than, in this case, merely decorate it. Here, though, the balance feels off, less an investment in longevity, more an upfront cash grab. It raises an uncomfortable question for me, which is Abyss something its creators intend to build upon, or simply a vehicle to sell costume packs quickly before the audience moves on? So Warriors Abyss is a fascinating experiment. A muso roguelike shouldn't work. One genre is built on effortless destruction, the other on careful survival. Yet somehow, this game almost pulls it off. The combat is engaging, the roguelike structure adds tension, and when everything clicks, can be a thrilling power trip. But almost isn't enough. Balance issues, a lack of enemy variety, frustrating difficulty spikes, and a rough technical performance hold Warriors Abyss back from being something special. It has its moments, but it's far from refined. If you are a Dynasty Warriors fan, hungry for something different, there's fun to be had for a while. But for most, this is a game you'll play, enjoy, and quickly forget. A 6 out of 10 for this one to me feels fair. Above average, but not strong enough to be a must-play in either the muso or roguelike space. So will you be checking out Warriors Abyss? Let me know in the comments below. Perhaps you've been playing it already. I'd love to hear your thoughts. With that then, do me a favour, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video. It helps us out a huge amount. We do reviews, deals, news, all that good stuff, all things PlayStation. And yeah, I'll see you all on the next video. Cheers all.